Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our talk. My name is Marlene Meyer. I curated this exhibition together with Olena Nevgrita, who is sitting right next to me, and I have the pleasure of introducing her as well. Before we introduce tonight's guest, Ana Jeinić, I want to briefly talk about the exhibition, Solid Roof, Severe Weather. The audiovisual works presented here in the exhibition trace the social and economical fault lines in our contemporary society and speculate about the future of cities and the lives of people who inhabit these cities. In this context, the first part of our title, Solid Roof, refers to the infrastructures essential to our everyday lives and routines. Severe weather, on the other hand, refers to the socio-political and ecological challenges that destabilize these very foundations. Within the exhibition, a shift of perspective occurs. Some of the works are investigations of built places, places that can be mapped and signed to historical and cultural locations and contexts. Like the film essay Ruins in Reverse by Olena Nevgrita, which you can watch over there behind our screen. The film essay traces the transformation of a vacant Soviet residential building located in southern Ukraine and follows the circulation of its building materials. Another example for this kind of approach and a work that is really signed to a location is the work by Tekla Aslanishvili, which is over there, which talks about a failed infrastructural project on the shore of the Black Sea in Georgia. These works are then juxtaposed with speculations on anonymous, generic, and fictional spaces that can only be found on screens, in audio files, or in computer-generated images. In her double projection, third quarterly report, Manu Lukš, another artist we worked with, her work can be seen over there in the back corner. She identifies the smart city as a narrative partner and an agent in the collective life in urban spaces by linking data and the built infrastructure. The installation Deep Recession Station by artist Jean Maximo, which is in the back corner over there, leads us into a subterranean system of caves which is inhabited by a society that has isolated due to an increase in inequality, ecological disaster, and a shortage of resources. And the motive of social isolation and retreat is a link to the work that I contributed to the exhibition, which is called I Could Tell You, But Then You Would Know. And it traces semi-public spaces, such as sleeping capsules, meditation domes, love hotels, and examines the structures underlying these urban micro-infrastructures, which are mostly situated between self-optimization, the maximization of efficiency, and retreat. Finally, I want to introduce the audio play Sonic Boom by artist Michael Simko, who is among us tonight. That was developed specifically for the exhibition. A hint to the work is this, the little cat over there, the poster. And he created the underlying narration in some sort of collaboration with an artificial intelligence, a so-called storytelling algorithm. The story that they created together unfolds as a sort of a tale that develops, a tale about a smart city that develops a life of its own. I don't want to tell you more because I think Olena will mention the project again.
Yeah, and maybe also a few words regarding the display. it's quite minimalistic, but what we basically wanted to do with it is to actually approach the material and economic conditions of the exhibition space itself, so of the Kunsthalle Exnergasse. When we started working on the exhibition, we realized quite soon that the space is quite fragile. And because of that, it kind of determined the way the works are structured within the space itself. But what we also wanted to address is the economic fragility, let's say, or precariousness of independent spaces within the urban field. Because very often independent art spaces are kind of locked away in interim solutions and in spaces that are, very often desolate. So what we wanted to do is to quite literally offer the Kunsthalle Exnergasse a supporting structure, which you can see distributed in the space. And those supports that you might know from construction sites also hint to the future of the Kunsthalle Exnergasse, because it will be renovated soon. And here where we are sitting, we made a small intervention with a transparent foil. We kind of wanted to mark a space within the exhibition space that is not predominated by any artwork, but that can be a space used in various ways. And tonight we use it as a kind of communication zone and for the lecture of Ana Jeinić. And just briefly about the poster, you can also see the poster in public space, or maybe right now not anymore. It will be up again in public space in December for a week. And via the QR code, you can enter the audio file and walk through the city of Vienna and listen to the narration developed by Michael Simkum. When we started working on the exhibition and coming from the field of arts, it was quite important for us to open the exhibition up for a more interdisciplinary conversation and to leave, let's say, the safe space of the art field. And we are very pleased that Anna can be with us tonight and give a lecture. Ana Jeinić is a researcher, curator, organizer, and utopian. And I will read this out now because your biography is so long, I can't remember everything. Anna, you have studied architecture and philosophy in Graz, Venice, and Delft. You were an assistant professor at the Institute of Architectural Theory, Art History, and Cultural Studies in Graz. And you researched and lectured at Edinburgh School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture. Also, you have managed a quite interesting curatorial project called Architecture After the Future, where you talked about architecture as how architecture as a discipline can adapt to the global crisis of the future. Quite recently, you have co-organized Grazutopia, an experiment in collective utopian urban planning, where you also held some workshops that we might hear about later. Since June, you are responsible for the architectural program at the Forum Stadtpark in Graz. And apart from this long list of achievements, you have also published many, many essays and articles. And today you will give us an introduction on the topic of speculation within the field of architecture and urban planning. I'm very excited about this. Thank you again for coming, and we will have a short talk afterwards.
Sorry for this break, for technical reasons. First of all, I want to thank you very much for inviting me to give a lecture here today. I find the exhibition really very interesting, and it resonates with my own work a lot. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you also for introducing me. It didn't have to be so long. I will try today to speak not so much about speculation in architecture and urban planning, probably because I have already talked about these topics so much that now I will try to expand the field a little bit and try really to address speculation in art. However, I will not do that as an expert in art theory, which I'm not, but still I hope that this perspective that I can provide that rather comes from the margin of art or from the intersection between art, design and urban planning can add another interesting point of view to the debate on speculation within the art discourse. I guess that you are already acquainted with the term because it was the Viennese philosopher Armen Avanesian who about 5 to 10 years ago played a significant role in promoting the concept of speculation or introducing the concept of speculation in art discourse. I guess that some of you also recognize the style of this drawing. It is a drawing of Andreas Töpfer, an artist and illustrator from Berlin who cooperated with Armen Avanesian on several books. However, this drawing itself was developed for the Architecture After the Future project that Olena already mentioned and that I curated a few years ago. I will start with a very short introduction into the history of the concept of speculation. Until recently, the term speculation had mainly negative connotation, and we used it particularly in relation to the last financial crisis, which started in 2008. We used it when we were talking about speculative finance or speculative or land speculation. And even in the field of theory, speculation also rather had a negative meaning. So we would say this is pure speculation if we want to indicate that certain argument or statement is not provable, that it is not grounded in experience. However, about 10 years ago, speculation started to assume a more positive meaning, or it was introduced on purpose, on one hand, in contemporary philosophy, and at the same time, although without direct connection, it was also introduced as a positive concept in the field of design. Here you can see a publication edited by Armen Avanesian and Suhail Malik in 2016, entitled Genealogies of Speculation, which addresses the concept of speculation and this revival of speculation in the field of philosophy. And here in 2013, designers Anthony Duna and Fiona Raby published a very influential book entitled Speculative Everything, Design Fiction and Social Dreaming. So that is the time when also the term speculative design was coined, and it became very popular in a very short time. And since the trends in art and design don't last for a long time now, we can say like 10 years later or that it's almost a little bit outdated already. However, I still think that there are that these speculative approaches are still very present in both design and artistic practice. So I think that addressing them and differentiating between diverse approaches to speculation and the position taken by the speculative artist is still meaningful and still necessary in order to, first of all, in order to bring some, to make some sort of a mapping of this territory, so that each of us can position himself or herself within the field and know in an explicit way in what way we want to speculate and what we want to speculate about. So this clarification is something that seems important to me, and this mapping. And I also think that we should introduce an approach to speculation which still is not so present, neither in the field of design and urban planning, and even less in the field of art. So at the end of the lecture, I will try to make like a very, very broad description of what this new form of speculation could look like and why I think that it is necessary. So what I will try to do in this first part of the lecture is to describe three different approaches to speculation in the artistic practice. The first one is something that I would call like critical reflection on speculative practice. It is a form of artistic practice in which the artwork produced is not in itself speculative, but it is rather a critical reflection on mostly negatively connotated speculative practice, be it urban speculation or something like smart cities. So the art is used as a critical tool to analyze and question these speculative practices. The example that I'm showing now is not very famous. However, I think it is quite instructive and illustrates this approach very well. It is a work of a Canadian artist, Paul Landon. Dissolving Futures is the name of this series of photographies. From 2017, actually, Paul Landon worked for several years collecting these photos, and for the first time published them, or in 2070s as a series. And he was one of the artists that participated in the exhibition Architecture After the Future that I curated at that time. So this photo series depicts pictures of urban development that are like architectural renderings that are placed in front of construction sites in the cities. So what the work addresses is, on one hand, this tendency to perceive cities more through images than through like a direct experience of the urban environment. But what it also addresses is the tendency of these pictures of urban environments to be speculative, like these renderings. They do not depict the city as it is. They depict they depict how it should look like in the future. So you know them. They are placed in front of almost every construction site nowadays, to the point that sometimes these pictures of a possible future condition completely replace the present city. However, what often happens is that these projects never materialize really, and these projections of the future start to fade away or dissolve or become themselves sort of ruins before the future that they depict ever materializes. So the city is always in this state of like dissolving pictures or decaying pictures of its own future. So in this case, we really have literally reflection, like photography of Paul Landon is critical image of a speculative image that is shown in the photo series. So another example. I think that several works here in the exhibition use kind of similar approach. And that's why I hope that what I'm saying now resonates with the exhibition itself. And so this is another method And it is, and I will call it critical future speculation. It is the method that corresponds to what speculative design is about, or what most of the proponents of speculative design consider speculative design to be. I will read a definition of speculative design by one of the most prominent, most important proponents, James Auger. He says, speculative design combines informed, hypothetical extrapolations of an emerging technology's development with a deep consideration of the cultural landscape into which it might be deployed to speculate on future products, systems, and services. These speculations are then used to examine and encourage dialogue on the impact a specific technology may have on our everyday lives. Although this approach is common in design, it is also very common in arts, or actually what is called speculative design. Many observers consider it actually more art than design, because what these designers do is they do not shape the objects that will be commercially used in the future, so that they don't shape products that will really be produced, but they rather shaped objects that look like as if they were made to be produced, but they probably will never be, because they are too provocative for mass production, so their role is not. Sometimes they even mimic the situation of real production and are presented in such a way that you really think that this is a product that you can buy, but of course they are not. So in these cases, design, or we can call it art, is used in order to extrapolate present tendencies, mostly present trends, mostly related to technological development, to bring these tendencies to their extreme, and by showing these extreme situations embodied in the designed objects, they encourage us to question these trends. The examples I'm now showing are rather old, but I do it on purpose because, well, these are like canonical examples that are mostly used when we talk about speculative design. And I think this approach is also, although it is very old, something that is still very present in design and artistic practice. So this here is by James Auger and Jimmy Loiza. It's called Audio Tooth Implant, and it was really promoted in the media as if it was a product that you could buy. It is a tooth that you can implant, as it says, and it contains a receiver of audio signals that is then directly connected to the nerve cells in your inner ear. So it functions like a mobile phone, let's say. So you don't, it receives signals from like all sorts of audio signals and transforms them directly into nerve impulses. It is connected to, it can be connected to your mobile phone or any other similar device that customizes the signals so that you do not receive everything, but just what you want to receive, and you can switch it off when you want. And they even made a promotional video. So in that video you can see, for example, men and women sleeping, and then the man is a policeman or fireman or something like that, and then he jumps from the sleep because he received the the signal that something is going on and he has to go to work. This is another also canonical example, Anthony Dune and Fiona Raby's work, Faraday Chair, produced as early as 1994 or between 1994 and 1997. It is part of their collection of furniture that they designed. So this Faraday chair is one piece of furniture, and it is developed so to protect you from all sorts of magnetic, electromagnetic radiation. So when you are there, you are completely isolated from all sorts of signals. And it has on purpose this kind of ambivalent logic of, on one hand, providing shelter and being perceived as something positive, so a place you can, where you can hide from all signals that you are normally exposed to. So on one hand, it is associated with these positive emotions, with the picture of a shelter, but at the same time it is a sort of imprisonment. Also this position of a fetus in which you can lie in this Faraday chair kind of amplifies this ambivalence, because while on one hand you are completely protected in this environment, at the same time you are imprisoned and you can be an object of control and manipulation, like a fetus produced in a laboratory setting. So these both projects, what they have in common is that they question the present tendencies by like extrapolating them to such extreme situations. And I think it is also an approach that you can still find today. It's very common in artistic practice. And then the third one I will call Post-Apocalyptic Utopianism. And it encompasses projects and artworks in which future disaster is seen as a catalyst of a socio-ecological transformation. So the disaster is seen as a precondition for change. One typical project here is Liam Young's Where the City Can't See. It is a work that was developed in several formats. One of them multimedia performance and a video. And it is a video shooted by the sensory apparatus that is used in automated vehicles. So it is not a normal camera, but they really shooted it using this technology that is applied in automated cars. And it is it depicts like hypothetical future Detroit owned by a Chinese company or government. It is called Detroit Economic Zone. And it depicts a journey of workers who work in this city during the day and use a taxi in the night. So it is of course automated taxi, and we see the city from the perspective of that taxi. And what these workers do in the night is that they search for places which are not accessed or which are not covered by this sensory technology. So there are like hidden places in the cities or like gaps which are inaccessible to this sensory apparatus that like kind of governs or regulates the whole city, which is completely automated. And what they do is they engage in some form of rituals in which they escape or hack these recognition technologies. So what Liam Young says himself about the project. So he describes these the activities of these workers, They are part of an underground community that work on the production lines by day, but at night adorn themselves in machine vision camouflage and the tribal masks of anti-facial recognition to enact their escapist fantasies in the hidden spaces of the city. They hack the city and journey through a network of stealth buildings, ruinous landscapes, ghost architectures, anomalies, glitches, and sprites, searching for the wilds beyond the machine. We see this very negative future scenario as a catalyst for transgressive actions and new forms of revolt and resistance, and the new types of underground or new types of subcultures. And this is a project that I guess also the most of you know. It is a Superflux project from this year's Vienna Biennial called Invocational Hope. And here also we have like this apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic scenario. We see these trees and the outside layer of the installation that are completely burnt and dead. However, at the same time, they provide kind of material for a new life that emerges from within of this situation, and that kind of new post Anthropocene symbiotic socio-ecological situation or landscape we see in the central part of the installation. So they describe it as something really like full of life. This green part in the middle, and it should represent like really new forms of living together, or new forms of trans-species interactions and kind of emerging sustainable socio-ecological condition that arises from within the disastrous condition that we have now, or that we are heading toward. So these are three different approaches which of course we could make a different taxonomy of speculative strategies in artistic practice. I do not aspire to make some kind of final classification. It is just to show that we can really approach this topic in quite different ways, and these different ways all express a very different relationship toward the future, or how we think about the future and how we use art or artistic practice to question or change future trajectories. I think, however, that all of these three strategies that I presented have some drawbacks, or actually that they have a common drawback, and it is that I don't think that any of them is really capable of helping us overcome the situation which can be properly termed as capitalist catastrophism. And it is this very spread belief that we are already kind of within a disaster that is happening, and that there is nothing we can do at this moment to prevent it. So even these like positive post-apocalyptic projects see the disaster as a precondition for change. And I'm asking myself, is it possible to use artistic practice for helping us really find alternative trajectories? And also give us a more comprehensive picture of this process of transformation toward these like more desirable futures or more just futures. Of course, you could argue that this is not the role of art, and indeed it is in the first place the role of politics or political, emancipatory political movements, backed also by expertise coming from different sciences, that is necessary in order for such a transformation to happen. So the question is what at all is or would be the role of art in that process, and even more so in the situation in which it seems that the political movements themselves do not provide such positive utopian scenarios and paths of transformation. However, the climate has been changing a little bit, and nowadays we can see some movement. That's at least my impression. Also beyond just academic publishing. Of course, there are many publications about this possible transformation toward more sustainable and more just futures. But it seems to me that the political movements are also incorporating these ideas more and more. However, this question still remains, would such an artistic practice that would use the imaginative capacity of art to help us envision these alternative futures, could it still be considered art, or would it be a very cheap and explicit form, too explicit form of art? That's a question, of course, because if we want to use art for such purposes, we would challenge what for years or for decades has served as a kind of main concept of what art, what contemporary art is about. So we have all been trained to see art not as something that is here to give us answers, but as something to help us pose questions. That's how all of us tend to perceive good artworks. And I'm asking myself if we should maybe change this conception. I'm not sure myself, and as I said at the beginning, I'm not an art theorist. For design disciplines, of course, it is much easier because design, architecture, and particularly urban planning are not seen as forms of engagement that are here for helping us formulate right questions, but urban planning is something that, so what we expect from it is to give us answers, to propose the future, positive future developments. However, I think what a specific and really very useful contribution of art could be in this sense is this imaginative capacity of art that other disciplines do not have. Its capacity to really make these future scenarios palpable, to place them in the context of everyday life, to create situations that, hypothetical situations that people can identify with. So I do think that artistic practice could contribute to this, and I also think that if there is an art form that in the past also fulfilled this purpose, it is utopian novel. So the question with which I would like to finish this lecture is if it is possible to use this form of utopian novel as a model for the artistic practice that speculates about the future in different ways than the types of speculation that I have previously showed. Of course, utopian novel itself does not have to, and it should also not depict just one future scenario as entirely positive. So certain utopian literature from the second half of the 20th century until today is capable of at the same time depicting this predominantly positive future, but also keeping certain ambivalence and questions open. I would say that the work of Ursula Le Guin is really typical in this sense. So could her novels inspire contemporary art is an interesting question from my point of view. And there is also one more aspect that I think such speculations should include, and it is the participative development of future scenarios. That's also something that is easier to achieve in design disciplines than in artistic practice, which still is based on the idea of an artist as the exclusive author of the work. So participation in artistic practice is rather about the interaction. I would rather call it interaction than participation. So it is still the artists who develop the concept, the setting in which certain interaction happen, but really engaging non-artists in the practice of future speculation is not so common in arts, so far I know. And I think that this participation is necessary if these futures are really to be like collectively shaped futures. Even in design disciplines, it is not common. Their participation is a common part of practice, but only in as far as it is directed toward a development of very concrete proposals. For example, a typical example of a participative practice in urban planning is if there is a certain park, in this new park in the city that is being developed, then you would try to involve the potential users of this park to express their desires regarding and their needs and their visions regarding the future form and content of this park. But when it comes to speculation about really alternative, let's say, post-capitalist or post-Anthropocene futures, we do not have methods and forms for these forms of this type of participation, and that's something I have been working on in the last year, and the project Utopia that Olena also mentioned when she was introducing me is exactly about that. So it is a model for a year-long procedure that should enable non-experts to engage in speculating about post-capitalist city, in this case the city of Graz. However, Utopia is not an art project, and I think it is an interesting question if and in which way artistic practice could also contribute to this form of future speculation. So with this, I would end the lecture, and I hope that it maybe opens some questions that we can discuss now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. I think at this point we would like to open up the discussion. So if anyone has questions right now, please let us know. Otherwise, we, of course, have prepared some questions as well. Yeah, there's already one. Okay.
Yeah, I did not refer to a specific type of utopian novel. You are of course right that utopian novel has a very long history, and that what nowadays is considered utopian novel is not the same as when Thomas More wrote his first work that established the genre. However, when I talk about utopian novel, I mean these works that still contain the mainly positive vision of a possible future. So I'm not talking about dystopian novels. Sometimes dystopias are also considered part of this utopian genre. And actually the majority of 20th century, particularly late 20th century utopian novels are rather dystopias. So that's why on purpose I mentioned Ursula Le Guin, whose novels in particular, like the most famous one, the Dispossessed, is utopia. It is not a dystopian model, however, it does contain certain ambivalence. So it still opens many questions about that future society. Do we really want to live like that? What aspects each of us considers positive? So it is a work that whenever you organize like a collective reading of it, you can be sure that after it you will have a really passionate discussion about specific aspects of the novel, because each person involved will probably interpret something as positive that others see as negative. So I'm talking about mainly positive proposals, which, however, are open for debate.
Sorry, it's for the stream apparently, I have to be louder. Do you know about solar punk? It's because that sounds very much like the ideas around solar punk, which is this kind of literary movement, if you want to call it like that, that I think was established in the US a few years back. Authors creating science fiction that specifically try to paint like a more not so dark or dystopian picture, but more like utopian ideas, especially like on climate fiction and stuff like that. I think that sounds very much like what you are hinting at.
I have to say I'm also not a literary theorist, so not an expert in that field either. But there is one point that I consider also particularly important in this discussion, and that is not only picturing possible utopian future, but also the transformation, the process of transformation toward this picture. So I think that the speculative form I'm talking about should always include this aspect as well, which I sometimes, there are in contemporary art, at least I have seen several projects that do depict some positive future, but it is very vague of how we might get there.
Yeah, regarding this, how can art be utopian, or how can art or an artist speculate about a utopian situation and maybe even create something that can be used in a sense. Like speaking from myself, from the position of an artist, I have the feeling that this is maybe rather not so common in the art field, because most of the artists do work alone. There is like this artist collective. They are developing films that are speculating about an ecosexual future, and it is also kind of very utopian and positive, but they are again working together, and this is like a very specific niche. I have the feeling that those kind of strategies for developing a utopian view are maybe more applied in fields of art that are more like performative, or as you said, reading together, discussing things together. So methods or of art that are per se done collectively and that per se include many different views. Because if I think like, okay, I'm developing an utopia, then I'm always talking from my subject perspective. And I think what is also rather done in the art scene is that people work together, for example, in collectives, and develop within the collective, let's say, a utopia about how they want to work together as a collective, and then they kind of live it. Yeah, so I'm just, this is not a question, this is more like something that I came up with. Maybe this is a part of an art where this can apply, and in some other fields of art it can't so easily.
Yes, definitely. I think each artist should, if he or she is interested at all in this form of utopian speculation, try to find adequate formats for it. Like one possibility is to use your skills as artist, let's say video artist, to express in this form something that is developed collectively in some guided process, workshop, or whatever. That's one possibility. Another, of course, is to make this collective process of imagination, organize it as a performance itself. And then what you mentioned, I find it also interesting, this last example of living utopia. So not just speculating about it, but trying to apply it directly. And so this application of a utopian idea becomes art, an art project. However, I think that, and this does not refer just to artistic practice, but it is my general position on what I call experiential utopianism. So it is this like applied utopia. I think that these practices cannot provide us really, to a certain degree, they can show a path toward a kind of better, bit more sustainable, more just future. But some futures cannot be performed in the present because the global conditions or the surrounding conditions have to be different. So these experiential utopias are always micro-utopias, but they are not applicable to a broader society, and the society is not something that is just made as an assemblage of these micro worlds. So it is not just by adding, if you know, like if all of us created that same utopia, that the world as a whole would change, because at a larger level we have very different dynamics. And this is why I consider it really speculative utopianism, something that is at least as important as experiential utopianism, both in art and beyond.
Hey, sorry I popped in a little late, so I'm sorry if this was covered already. Just generally speaking, I'm just very curious, do you find it easier to be inspired by, I know obviously you do a lot of utopian work, or like utopian related stuff, but I don't know if you've ever worked, if your work ever like covered dystopian futures, but if so, do you find it easier to be inspired by a dystopian future rather than a utopian one?
Dystopias and dystopian artworks are so present that, to be honest, I find it a little bit boring to engage with them, right, because we are overwhelmed by dystopian art, dystopian novels, dystopian movies, all sorts of artwork. And what the authors of these artworks or projects claim is that the sense or the meaning of dystopia is a warning. It is something that shows us in what direction we should not go. And but to be honest, I think we already know it, all of us, before we read a utopian novel. It is just like with this dystopian novel. It is just like with these works that I showed, James Auger and Dune and Raby, their projects. To be honest, I'm not sure if they really teach us something, because we are already critical of these technological developments even before seeing this. These artworks. And if we are technological optimists, these artworks will definitely not change our position. So I'm a little bit skeptical about their transformative potential.
It's maybe easier to see the problem rather than the solution.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool, thanks.
Then I would like to pick up on a topic that, you haven't mentioned specifically, but something that came up when we prepared, and I think it was a question that you raised, Olena, the question of images. As artists ourselves, we noticed that when talking about the future or speculating about a space that isn't yet in place, it's extremely hard to find images. I think this is why a lot of artists use renderings or things like that. Common images that display some sort of future to imagine this place. And I was wondering if you, in your research, came across different strategies other than the ones we discussed today, or that are so common in art practice.
Well, unfortunately not really, but I wrote an essay about Paul Landon's work that I showed at the beginning, and in that essay I also analyzed the architectural rendering as a form, as a format, and in contemporary architectural discourse, like critical architectural discourse, rendering itself as a form is seen as something negative. because the argument against that it is a seductive image, and as such it fulfills a commercial purpose, instead of being like what architectural projects should be, and that is a kind of mostly visually neutral description of a future condition. But I kind of tried to completely reverse this argumentation, and instead it is exactly this seductive potential of rendering that I considered great. That's what we need. It is just the content that needs to be changed, in my opinion. So I even propose, you know, to my problem with this city that is just more and more composed of the images of its potential futures that never realized. Actually, I don't have a problem with this city as such. It is just the content of the images that I think should change. So imagine really in front of these construction sites having like post-capitalist alternative futures depicted by different artists. And if our cities, because it is the something that I appreciated in Armen Avanesian's work, and that I also, I think he described it in a really nice way, is that we live in an age in which future speculation more and more determines our present, in the sense of on one hand, like financial speculations, then practices that are called preemptive policing or preemptive warfare, also climate modeling, risk assessment, and more recently, pandemic modeling. So all these future projections actually shape our present. And there is like a natural reflex on the part of so-called critical art to criticize this speculative logic, what Avanesian calls speculative time loops, like these speculations that like a boomerang come back to our present. And what he proposes instead, and where I share his opinion, is to, instead of avoiding speculations, we should speculate in a different way, or offer alternative speculations. And I'm sorry for now if I this is not a direct answer to your question, but I just found it important to. And just one more remark on this. There are, even in the field of economics nowadays, certain groups or tendencies to use financial speculation for a different purpose, to create new financial instruments and completely new economic platforms, mostly helped by a blockchain technology, in order to promote more inclusive and redistributive economic practice. An interesting example is a group called Economic Space Agency, and there are also, I guess that you might know them, because these trends are also, they have been thematized in the context of art. So this is a development that there is a series of conferences called Money Lab. They are, I guess you know them. Okay. I think one of the organizers is Institute of Network Cultures. So it's basically art discourse, where these new economic or new forms of fintech as alternative forms are presented. And
are there any more questions? Do you know what's the time? Okay, maybe we have time for one more question. I don't know what's the time, I don't have my... But I was just, because you were talking about time, actually, that we always, or speculation is also happening from a very specific context, from a very specific context within a certain region and also within a certain time. And I was just wondering that maybe some dystopian views of the future in future will be could be actually seen as utopian past, or you know what I mean? That actually the speculation about the future probably also changes when seen backwards or when traveling through times, let's say, and through time perspectives. Yeah, I don't know if you can, or if you want to add something to that.
Yeah, I find it really an interesting question, because as Avanesian says in these speculative time loops, that future speculation influences and shapes our present. We can say the same for past speculations, that the traces of these speculations and these past utopian projects also shape our present, and also our ideas about what is utopian and what is dystopian. Because this is a particularly relevant topic in the context of post-socialist countries, and where these socialist modernities, and maybe even more in the context of former Yugoslavia, where I come from, which in terms of its architecture and art was, in order to differentiate itself from the Soviet bloc, was explicitly modernist. So we have these socialist modernist projects never fully realized, and like future projections that like ghosts still inhabit our present. And the question is what we do with this heritage of utopian speculation. I think these speculations can be useful as well. So we can use them as a material. So there are different time trajectories, and the speculative practice can integrate.
Any more questions? Okay, otherwise I would say, I think many of the things that we have just talked about and that you have mentioned are also reflected quite well in some of the works, and maybe if you have time to have a look around. Also, I want to briefly notice that we will have a curatorial guided tour on the 4th of December, and that, but as I said already before, the work of Michael Simku will be up in public space from the 8th of December for a week. Well, thank you, Anna. It was very interesting, and thank you all for coming.